Namaskaram. Today I'm going to be talking about the 11th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. What Bhagavan is talking about in the 11th paragraph is a continuation of what he was talking about in the 10th paragraph, which I talked about last time, namely the subject of viṣaya-vāsaṇās. Before I go on to talk about the paragraph itself, I just want to clarify the exact meaning of the term vasana. Vasana is a term that is used a lot in Indian philosophy, particularly Vedanta. An equivalent term that is also used is samskara. They're both used in very much the same sense. In English books on Bhagavan's teachings, vasana is generally translated as tendency. But I feel that isn't quite capturing the idea of vasana. That is, we can have a tendency without intention. That is, for example, we can say a small child, a toddler, or an elderly person has a tendency to fall down. That tendency isn't a volitional tendency. It just so happens because they're not steady on their feet, they tend to fall down. Or we can say someone has a tendency to be forgetful. It's just their nature. They tend to be forgetful. There's no implication there that they want to be forgetful. It's just the way they are. So that because vasana implies it's an element of the will. It's the seed that gives rise to likes, dislikes, desires, and so on. So tendency doesn't quite capture the meaning of it. Another term that is sometimes used to translate vasana or samskara is propensity. But again, propensity is more or less like a tendency. It may be volitional, but it's not necessarily volitional. For example, we can say someone has a propensity to put their foot in their mouth. What that means is they have a tendency to say inappropriate things in inappropriate circumstances. They're not intentionally doing that. It's just they just don't have good judgment, and so they say the wrong thing at the wrong time. Sometimes vasana or samskaras, it's associated with habits. But again, habits aren't necessarily volitional. For example, we can say someone has a habit of getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but their work may require them to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So Monday to Friday, they have to get up at 5 o'clock every morning. So on Saturday and Sunday, even though they may like to sleep longer, they wake up anyway at 5 o'clock because they have that habit. So habit also doesn't, even less than tendency or propensity, habit is not an appropriate translation for vasana. Another very inappropriate translation, which gives rise to a lot of confusion. Often samskaras or vasanas are interpreted as impressions. And so they're often confused with memories. A memory is a perceptual impression. We perceive something, we experience something, that leaves an impression on our mind, but we can later recall. That is not what is meant by vasana. Vasana is not a memory. That is, vasanas are sometimes translated as memories, and because vasanas are said to reside in chittam, that is of the four antakaranas, there is manam, buddhi, chittam, and ahankaram. Manam means mind. In this context, it means the grosser functions of the mind. Antakarana means the inner instruments. So the mind is the gross, manam in this context means the grosser functions of the mind, perceiving, thinking, remembering, and so on, emotions and feelings and so on. All these grosser functions of mind are manam. Subtler than manam, and that is what is also called manamaya kosha. Subtler than manam is the buddhi. Buddhi means intellect. That is that faculty of the mind that discriminates, judges, reasons, and so on. That is the buddhi, or also called the vijnanamaya kosha. She's composed of the intellect. Subtler than that is the chittam. As I say, chittam is often mistranslated as memory, but that's not what chittam is. Chittam means the will. I don't know about in other Indian languages, but for example, in Tamil, sometimes they say Kadaval chittam or Ishwara chittam. That means the will of God. So chittam means, in this context, means will. Will means, in its grosser form, the will is all likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. But the seeds that give rise to all of these are the vasanas. So what the will essentially is, it's the totality of all our vasanas. And that is what is also called Anandamaya kosha. The fourth so-called instrument is ahankara. That is ego. Ego is quite distinct from the other three, because whereas the other three are koshas, they are things other than ourselves, ahankara is that which identifies itself with all the five koshas, all the five sheaves. So the function of ego is said to be abhimanam. That means attachment and identification. We identify ourselves. We identify ourselves with the body, with the life, with the mind, the intellect, and the will. That which identifies itself with all these is ahankara. So, as I say, chittam means will, but it's often misinterpreted as memory. The reason it's misinterpreted as memory is because vasanas and samskaras are often taken to be impressions, but they are in a sense they're impressions, but it's very different to memory. Memory is a impression, plain and simple. The sense in which a vasana or a samskara is an impression is if we do an action, whatever actions we do actions in order to experience certain viṣayas. So our inclination to experience viṣaya means objects or phenomena, or anything other than ourselves is a viṣaya. So our inclination to experience viṣayas are called viṣaya-vāsaṇās. And viṣaya-vāsaṇās therefore lead to karma vasanas, that's inclinations to do action. Whatever actions we do in order to experience something. So when we do actions, supposing we do a certain action, and as a result of that action, we experience something. So we have an inclination to do that action again and again and again. So the vasana or samskara is an impression only in the sense that the more we do something, the more we strengthen the inclination to do it. But it's not, impression really, it's a very misleading translation of it. Though in a certain sense it's an impression, it's quite distinct from a memory. You can have the actions of our past lives have left vasanas behind. That doesn't mean that we remember those actions, what we did in past lives, or we may have completely forgotten. Even the things we've done in this life, we may have forgotten many things, but still they've left the vasana or samskara, the inclination to do those things again and again. So, impression is also a very inappropriate translation of vasana or samskara. the English term that I think comes closest to the sense of conveying the meaning of vasana or samskara is inclination, because an inclination is a tendency, but the word inclination implies not only tendency, but also a liking or a willing. That is, it's got that element of will in it. Is implied by the English term inclination. So in my view, inclination is the most appropriate translation of vasana or samskara, because it comes closest to conveying the sense of it. As I say, the vasanas or samskaras, they are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears, and so on. So there are will in its seed form. And the vasanas, they are described as seeds. For example, in the second verse of Upadesha, Bhagavan refers to vasanas as seeds. He says, he points out that the fruit of action passes away, but the seeds remain, and the seeds are what make us, what immerse us in the ocean of action. So the seeds there means vasanas. In Tamil, the term he uses is vittu, which means seed. In the Malayalam version, he says vasanakara vittu. That means the seeds in the form of vasana. So he's very clearly, what he's referring to as seeds there is vasanas. But actually, anyone who is familiar with Advaita philosophy, when we talk of seeds is referring to the vasanas or samskaras. In the Sanskrit version of verse 2, because Bhagavan wrote the Upadesha Saram, the Sanskrit version of Upadesha Undya, in a shorter meter, he couldn't always fit in all the words. So he hasn't actually specified the word seeds there. What he says in Sanskrit is, Kriti Mahodado Patana Karanam. He simply says the cause for falling in the great ocean of action. What is that cause? He doesn't specify there, but anyone who understands the karma theory correctly will understand, yes, what causes us to fall in the ocean of action is the seeds, the vasanas. So the vasanas, they are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, and so on. And swayed by our vasanas, we do actions. This is why vasanas are the cause for our falling in the ocean of action. According to Bhagavan, vasanas are also, Bhagavan sometimes compared vasanas to the images on a film reel. When a film reel is rolling through the projector, images are projected on the screen. Those images that appear on the screen are just a projection of the images on the film reel. So Bhagavan compared vasanas to the images on a film reel, because whatever we experience is a projection of our vasanas. That is, this whole universe is a projection of our vasanas. So this term vasana has a very, very deep and highly significant, I mean, it's a highly significant term in Bhagavan's teachings and in Vedanta philosophy, and indeed in most philosophy, most Indian philosophers. In Buddhism, for example, they talk a lot about samskaras or sankharas, as it's called in Pali. Though they give slightly different meaning to it, it's more or less the same. And in yoga, they talk about samskaras in the same way, in the same sense. So this is a very, very important term. Of all the five sheaves, the subtlest of the five sheaves is the Anandamaya kosha, which, as I say, is the will, the chittam. That is the collection of all the vasana. The totality of all our vasanas is the chittam, or the Anandamaya kosha, which is also called the Karana Sarira, the causal body. Why is it called the causal body? Because it consists of the seed that give rise to everything else. So this is an extremely important term in Indian philosophy, particularly in Advaita, and most especially in Bhagavan teaching. As far as what the context in which Bhagavan talks about vasanas in the 10th and 11th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār is the practice Bhagavan has taught us, the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. As Bhagavan says, it is extremely simple. In Atma-Vidya, he says all the paths to untie the knots of bondage and to bring an end to this cycle of birth and death, all the paths, this is extremely easy. That means it's easier than all other paths, is the implication. So, but the experience of most of us is that this is anything but easy. It seems extremely difficult to us to hold on to self-attentiveness. Yes, we can turn our attention a little bit back towards ourselves, but it keeps on bouncing out again. So it seems to be a very great struggle to hold on, for us to hold on to self-attentiveness without allowing our attention to be diverted away from other things. And because we are not able to hold on, because it seems difficult for us to hold on to self-attentiveness, we are not able to surrender ourselves. Because in order to surrender ourselves, as he says in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, we have to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly that we give not even the slightest room to rising of other thoughts. That is surrendering ourselves. So for most of us, that seems to be very difficult, even though Bhagavan says it is very easy. Bhagavan, of course, is right when he says it is easy, but we are not wrong in saying that it's wrong to say it is difficult, but it's not wrong to say it seems difficult. It is actually easy, it seems difficult. The reason it seems difficult is because of our lack of willingness. We are not willing to let go of other things. So when we try to hold on to I am, or to ourselves, our attention keeps on jumping out and trying to hold on to other things. That is the nature of ego. As Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunappi, ego is a formless phantom that comes into existence grasping form, stands grasping form, and grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes, it waxes abundantly. So grasping forms there means viṣayas, anything other than ourselves. So the very nature of ego is to grasp things other than itself. And when we don't grasp any things other than ourselves, we can't stand as ego. That's why as ego, we grasp things other than ourselves for our very survival. So viṣaya-vāsaṇā, the inclination to grasp things other than ourselves, it's the very nature of ego to have viṣaya-vāsaṇās. And this is the main obstacle we come across. That is, when we are trying to turn our attention within, why does our attention keep on jumping outwards? Because we allow ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, our inclination to attend to other things. That is, we are so strongly inclined to attend to other things that though we have a little liking to attend to our liking to attend to other things is much stronger, so it overcomes our little liking to attend to I. That's why patient and persistent practice of self-attentiveness is necessary, as Bhagavan emphasizes in these two paragraphs. So I said all this just to clarify what is meant by vasana. It's not just a tendency, it's a volitional tendency. It's an inclination to liking, liking in its very seed form, a liking to experience things other than ourselves. And we have that liking because our very existence as ego depends upon attending to things other than ourselves. So the vasanas are the main obstacle that we're up against when we're trying to practice self-investigation and thereby surrender ourselves. That is, so long as we've got strong viṣaya-vāsaṇās, we cannot, our surrender is only a partial surrender. In order for our surrender to become complete, we need to cling so firmly to I am, but we are not swayed by our vasanas at all. We are not swayed by our inclination to attend to anything else. So I will now come to talk about what Bhagavan says in Nāṉ Ār. Last time I went through the 10th paragraph. This time it's the 11th paragraph I'm talking about, but I'm going to go through the 10th paragraph once more, because the 10th and 11th paragraph are so closely connected, and these are such important ideas. It's to think deeply about them is very, very important. So any number of times repeating them is I believe, beneficial for us to really understand what Bhagavan is saying in the 10th and 11th paragraph. This is key to understanding and putting his core teachings into practice. That is, his teachings are all about this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So understanding the nature of vasanas and how we can overcome, how we can weaken the viṣaya-vāsaṇās is key to understanding this practice correctly. So in the 10th paragraph, in the first sentence, he says, even though viṣaya-vāsaṇās, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed when swarupa dhyana increases and increases. Viṣaya-vāsaṇā, as I say, it's an inclination to attend to or be aware of or to experience anything other than ourselves, because all things other than ourselves, viṣaya literally means an object or a phenomenon, something other than ourselves. So our inclination to experience things other than ourselves are what are called viṣaya-vāsaṇās. So Bhagavan says, even though viṣaya-vāsaṇās, which come from time immemorial, this is also a very significant description. tōṇḍṟa-t, coming from time immemorial. tōṇḍṟa-t means literally, tōṇḍṟa is appearing, tatu is touching. That means it implies from the very beginning of time, from the time we rose as ego, these vasanas have been there. That is because it's the very nature of ego to have vasanas. Ego is not the vasanas. Vasanas are distinct from ego because our vasanas over time may change, but it's the nature of ego to have viṣaya-vāsaṇās. That's why the subtlest of all the 5 sheaves is the will, or the anandamaya kosha, or karana sarira, because the vasanas are what is closest to ego. That is, it's the nature of ego. What we are carrying from life to life. When this physical body dies, this physical body is finished, and though it is said we take the subtle body with us, what it means is that we take the vasanas with us, and the vasanas are what give rise to all the other 4 sheaves. So these are the this is the subtlest of all the 5 sheaves, and what is closest to ego. So ego is never without its viṣaya-vāsaṇās. The destruction of ego is also what is called vasanakshaya, the destruction of vasanas. We cannot destroy vasanas without destroying ego, because so long as ego is the root, so long as the root is there, the vasanas will be sprouting. It's the very nature of ego to have vasanas. So these vasanas, they come from time immemorial. They're always with ego. They may change over time. Things that we were inclined to experience in the past, we may not be inclined to experience now. Things that we're inclined to experience now, we may not have been inclined to experience them in the past. Over time, the vasanas may change, but that is, what we are inclined to experience may change, but the fact that we're inclined to experience things other than ourselves, that remains constant. And the vasanas are what are called the impurities in the mind. So when what is called purification of the mind, chitta-suddhi. Chitta-suddhi literally means pure, though it's often translated purification of mind, it literally means purification of the will, because the impurities in the mind are in the will. That is, they are the vasanas. So the stronger our vasanas, our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, the more impure our mind is. As the mind is purified, the viṣaya-vāsaṇās become weaker. And as the viṣaya-vāsaṇās become weaker, the contrary vasana, which is called sat-vasana, the inclination just to be as we are, that becomes stronger. So these vasanas are there from the beginning of time, from the moment we first rose as ego, whenever that was. It has been our nature to attend to things other than ourselves, to be inclined to attend to things other than ourselves. So that's what the implication of Bhagavan saying, that they come from time immemorial. And then he says, tōṇḍṟa-t viṣaya-vāsaṇaigaḻ, the viṣaya-vāsanas which come from time immemorial, alavatravanayi kadal alaikal bol tōṇḍṟaṇam, though they appear, alavatravanayi means without limit, that implies in countless numbers. That is, we can't say how many of them rise, and they rise like ocean waves. That is, throughout our waking and dream states, we are experiencing the rising of our viṣaya-vāsanas. Because generally our attention is on the viṣayas that the vasanas prompt us to attend to, we are more aware of the viṣayas than of the vasanas that prompt us to attend to them and to experience them. But the vasanas are always there. All our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, thoughts, perceptions, memories, all of these are nothing but the rising of vasanas. So whatever viṣayas we experience, the seeds of those viṣayas are the viṣaya-vāsanas. So we throughout the waking and dream state, we are experiencing these inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. And there are innumerable inclinations we have. They can't be counted. So Bhagavan says in countless numbers, and they rise like ocean waves. That is, they're not constant. There's constant flow of vasanas rising in our mind. So Bhagavan first says, what is the problem? That is, these vasanas which come from time immemorial. That means they're so deeply rooted, and they appear in countless numbers like ocean waves. However, what the important point in this sentence, avaigaḷai sarupa dhyana kalamba arindavidum. They will all be destroyed when swarupa dhyana increases and increases. Swarupa dhyana means, that is, swarupa means our real nature. Our real nature is just that fundamental awareness I am. Dhyana means meditation or attention. So our attention to our real nature, in other words, self-attentiveness, or meditating only on I am. That's not on the word I am, but what is denoted by those words, which is our fundamental awareness of our own existence. The more we attend to ourselves, the more the viṣaya-vāsanas will be weakened, and eventually they'll be destroyed. So that's the first sentence of the 10th paragraph. In the second sentence, he says, that is, when we put this into, and before saying what he says in this sentence, I'll put it into context. That is, when we try to cling firmly to self-attentiveness, we find there are so many vasanas, there's so many, our mind keeps on being dragged outwards to attend to other things. However much we try to attend to only to I am, we may attend to ourselves for a few moments, and then again our attention is diverted away towards something else. So it's very easy to get disheartened. So Bhagavan gives us an assurance in the next sentence. Well, in the next two sentences. In the second sentence, he says, without giving room even to a doubting thought, so many vasanas ceasing. I mean, so many vasanas, dissolving so many vasanas, is it possible to be only a swarupa? In other words, is it possible for us to overcome all these vasanas and to remain just as we actually are? Without even giving room to that doubting thought, Sarupa dhyanate vidāpidiyai vēṇḍum. It is necessary to cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness. The word that the adverb that I've translated as tenaciously is vidā-pidiyai. This is a very forceful way of saying it in Tamil. Vidu means to leave. Vidā means not leaving. Pidi means clinging. So vidā-pidiyai means clinging without leaving. And then the verb he uses is pidika, to cling. It's necessary to cling to cling clingingly without leaving. It's very difficult to convey it in English, but tenaciously it gives that idea of holding very fast to it. That's what's implied by this vidā-pidiyai vedikavendam. So it doesn't matter however many times our attention is diverted away from ourselves under the sway of our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, we need to bring it back and try our best to cling firmly to self-attentiveness. That is what is necessary. We persevere in doing this. Bhagavan assures us we will certainly succeed in this. In fact, he makes the assurance very clear in the next sentence, the third and last sentence of 10th paragraph. He says, however great a sinner one may be, if instead of lamenting, I am a sinner, how am I going to be saved? One completely rejects the thought that one is a sinner and is zealous or steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will certainly be reformed. So that is, Bhagavan is here giving us an assurance. We may be the worst of all the worst sinners. It doesn't matter. Let's not lament over the fact for our past sins. Even the worst of sinners can be transformed, can be reformed by giving up the thought that one is a sinner, giving up all thought and just being steadfast in self-attentiveness. Swarupa dhyanam dhyanatil ulavanaha, being one who is steadfast in that or zealous in that self-attentiveness. So we have to be so zealous, so steadfast in our self-attentiveness. If we do so, however great a sinner one we may be, however strong our viṣaya-vāsaṇās may be, we can succeed. We will certainly be reformed. He says, nichayamai urupaduvan. Nichayamai means certainly. The Bhagavan is giving us here a very great assurance. So this is what he says in the 10th paragraph. And the 11th paragraph, as I say, that's the main paragraph I'm going to be talking about today. This is a continuation of the same theme. What he says in the 11th paragraph is, in the first sentence he says, maṉattiṉgaṇ, edu-varaiyil, viṣaya-vāsaṇaigaḻ, irukkiṉṛḍaṇavō, adu-varaiyil, Nāṉ Ār eṉṉum vicāraṇai-y-um, vēṇḍum. What that means is, as long as viṣaya-vāsaṇās exist within the mind, so long is the investigation, who am I, necessary. So, as I said earlier, having viṣaya-vāsaṇās is the very nature of ego. So long as ego survives, we will have viṣaya-vāsaṇās. We will be inclined to attend to and experience things other than ourselves. So as long as viṣaya-vāsaṇās exist within the mind, so long is it necessary to continue this investigation, who am I? That is what he referred to in the previous paragraph as swarupa dhyana, contemplation of our real nature, or being self-attentive, is what he refers to here as the investigation, who am I? That is, it's the same practice, he just describes it in a different way. Why? There he described it as meditating on our real nature. Here he described it as investigating, who am I? It's the same thing, because how do we investigate what we are? Only by attending to ourselves. So we need to persevere in this practice so long as even the slightest trace of viṣaya-vāsaṇās remain in our mind. When eventually we by persevering in this practice, we will eventually, ego will subside and completely and dissolve back into its source. When ego is eradicated, all its vasanas will be eradicated along with it, because vasanas are inclinations. Whose inclinations? Ego's inclinations. So ego's inclinations cannot remain when ego is destroyed. So we have to persevere. The implication of this sentence is these vasanas will be with us till the very end. So long as there's ego, there will be vasanas. So we have to persevere in this practice until ego is completely surrendered, dissolved forever in its source, dissolved in such a way that it will never rise again. So Bhagavan again, Bhagavan is emphasizing here, this practice must go on till the very end. That, we shouldn't give up in this practice so long as we have the slightest inclination to be aware of anything or to experience anything other than ourselves. Then in the second sentence, he says, niṉaivugaḻ tōṉṭṛa-t. That means when thoughts appear and appear, or in English we'd say, as and when thoughts appear, appōdaikkappōdē, then and there. It's a idiomatic way of saying it. Like in English we say then and there. In Tamil it's there to there. Now that it means immediately. Then and there it is necessary. Avaigaḻai-y-ellām, uṭpatti-sthāṇattilēyē, vicāraṇaiyāl, naśippikka, vēṇḍum. Then and there, it is necessary to annihilate them all by vicāraṇā in the very place from which they arise. What is that place from which vasanas arise? Obviously, they arise only from ourselves. That is it. Who is it who is inclined to attend to other things? Only ego. So vasanas are all rising from ego. So by clinging to self-attentiveness firmly, as soon as each vasana arises, because we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by it, it is thereby annihilated then and there. That doesn't mean that we can, that is, to say we don't annihilate vasanas one by one, but what we are doing by clinging to self-attention and not allowing ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, we are weakening them. And eventually we'll annihilate them all. So that is, it's like you're up against an army of soldiers. The more you weaken that army when the soldiers of the opposite army are wounded and weakened, then the whole army is weakened, and eventually you can overcome it. Bhagavan uses that analogy later on in this same paragraph. So, as and when thoughts arise, what he's talking about here is annihilating the thoughts. But thought, what gives rise to those thoughts are the vasanas. That is, thoughts are all the sprouting of vasanas. And when he says, as and when thoughts appear, people often take thoughts to mean just the mental chatter that's going on in our mind. But Bhagavan uses the term thought, in a much deeper and broader sense. According to Bhagavan, all mental phenomena are thoughts. That is, all perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all are what Bhagavan refers to as thoughts. Even, that is, all objects, all phenomena are thoughts. Even the subject, the one who's aware of all those thoughts, is itself a thought. In other words, ego is itself a thought. So when Bhagavan says, as and when thoughts appear, I mean, when anything other than ourself appears, it's necessary to annihilate it, or to annihilate the inclination to attend to it by vichara in the very place from which they rose. The very place from which they rose is from ourself. So by clinging to self-attentiveness, and without allowing ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, in other words, without allowing our attention to go wherever those thoughts may lead us, just holding on to self-attentiveness, that is annihilating them in the very place from which they arose. It's annihilating them as they arise and in the very place from which they arise. When we allow ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇā, we then begin to follow whatever thought may have arisen. And the more we follow that thought, the further we are going away from the source. But even when our attention is diverted away from ourselves, we can, at any moment, we can bring it back to ourselves, because whatever may appear, to whom does it appear? It appears only to me. That's a very nice clue Bhagavan gave us to turn our attention back to ourselves, because nothing can appear without us, because it is only in our view that they appear. So to whom do they appear? To me. And we turn our attention back to ourselves. That doesn't mean we have to be asking the question, to whom, to me, and giving the answer to me. Though Bhagavan described it in those terms, he's pointing out to us there how whatever we may be experiencing, we can turn our attention back to ourselves, because we are always present there as the experiencer of it. Whatever appears, it appears only to us. So instead of attending to what appears, we should attend to ourselves, the one to whom it appears. The more firmly we hold on to self-attentiveness, the more we are thereby annihilating the thoughts as and when they arise in the very place from which they arise. So this is a very important sentence that Bhagavan gives us here, that is, we need to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly. But our nature is, the nature of ego is to have viṣaya-vāsaṇās and to be very strongly inclined to attend to things other than ourselves. So in order to cling to self-attentiveness, we need to overcome this inclination to attend to other things. If we manage to attend to ourselves so firmly that we thereby refrain from attending to anything else, that, Bhagavan says, is vairagya. Vairagya means desirelessness or dispassion. This is what he says in the next sentence. Anyate nada dirital vairagyam aladu nirasa. Here, Bhagavan uses two terms, vairagya and nirasa. These are two terms are synonyms. Raga means passion, or means desire or like passion in the sense of desire or liking. Viraga is freedom from that passion, and vairagya is the quality of being free from that. So vairagya, by implication, it means desirelessness. Nirasa literally means desirelessness. Asa is desire, nirasa is non-desire. So these are two synonyms Bhagavan uses here. That is, he's clarifying that what is meant by vairagya is nirasa. So what is desirelessness? What is vairagya? What is nirasa? Not attending to anything other than ourselves. Anyate, and anya is a Sanskrit word that means other. So and anyate Anya in Sanskrit becomes anyam in Tamil, and the accusative case form of anya is anyate. So anya means what is other. Nadadu means not attending or not investigating. Irital means being. So being without attending to anything other than ourselves, that is vairagya or nirasa. Anya, though it means other, it implies anything other than ourselves. So not attending to anything other than ourselves, that is vairagya or nirasa. And then in the next sentence he says, tanne vida dirital jnanam. Tanne means oneself. Again, tanne is accusative case form of tan, oneself. Vidadu means not leaving. Irital means being. But vidadirital, it's a way of saying not leaving. Like nada dirital, literally it means being without attending. Vidadirital literally means being without leaving. But it implies not leaving or not. In the previous sentence, nada dirital meant not attending. In this sentence, vidadirital means not leaving. Not leaving, or it can also mean not letting go of. Not letting go of oneself is jnana. Jnana means true knowledge or real awareness. So not attending to anything other than ourselves is vairagya or nirasa. Not leaving ourselves or not letting go of ourselves is jnana. And then he says in the next sentence, uṇmēyil irendum andre. In truth, the two are just one. That implies that in truth, vairagya and jnana are one. That is, if we cling to ourselves without leaving ourselves, that is not attending. That to the extent that we cling to ourselves, to that extent we are not attending to anything else. So, by clinging to ourselves, we are thereby refraining from attending to anything else, and that is clinging to ourselves is jnana. Not attending to anything else is vairagya. So the two are one. That's why uṇmēyil means in truth. Irendum means two, or both these two. That implies vairagya and jnana. Andre, just one. They're just one. Then in the next sentence, he gives an analogy to show the importance of having vairagya, of being free from desire to attend to anything other than ourselves. Oh, that's one more thing I wanted to say. That is, when he says not attending to anything other than oneself, our inclination to attend to things other than ourselves are what are called viṣaya-vāsaṇās. So if we refrain from attending to anything other than ourselves, that shows that our viṣaya-vāsaṇās have been weakened. We are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. So the extent to which we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, that is the extent to which we have vairagya or desirelessness. And this is obviously key to going deep in this practice, as Bhagavan illustrates with an analogy in the next sentence. This sentence is in two parts. The first half is the analogy, and the second half what it is analogous to. So the analogy is Muttu kulipol tam ideyil kalle katti kondu murki kadalaligal kidikum mutte epdi edukiraṇai-y-ellām. That means, just as pearl divers tying stones to their waists and sinking pick up pearls that are found at the bottom of the ocean, that is the analogy. So what is that analogous to? Appōdaikkappōdē, likewise, or in such a way, obvarūvanam, each person, vairagya tudan, with vairagya, tanul andu murki, sinking deep within oneself, Atma-vichara, may obtain the pearl, which is Atma, which is oneself, the pearl of oneself. Muttu means pearl, Atma means oneself. The terms he uses when he says Tannul Andu Murki, Andu and Murki are two adverbial participles that both mean more or less the same. Namely submerging, sinking, plunging, diving, entering, piercing, or being deep. So they can be interpreted either to mean sinking deep, in which case andu is taken to be serving as an adverb meaning deep or deeply, or they can be taken to mean submerging and sinking, in which case submerging, in the sense of submerging beneath the surface activity of the mind and thereby sinking deep. So we can take, I mean, either way, it more or less means the same thing. So it means going deep within ourselves. So how do we go deep within ourselves? Just like the pearl divers, they are able to sink, plunge deep enough into the ocean to get the pearls only by tying stones to their waist.
likewise, in order to go deep enough within ourselves, we need to have intense vairagya. That is, so long as we allow ourselves to be swayed by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, we'll go in, we'll dive a little, and again be brought up to the surface. So in order not to be drawn up to the surface again by our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, we need to have intense vairagya. We need to be free of the inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves. So vairagya is key to going deep in this path. Though Bhagavan doesn't mention it here, we need to understand we will have vairagya to the extent to which we have bhakti. Bhakti in this context means the love to attend to ourselves, and vairagya means freedom from desire to attend to anything else. We will be free of a desire to attend to other things only to the extent to which we have love to attend to ourselves. So by persevering in this practice, by clinging more and more firmly to self-attentiveness, we thereby strengthen our inclination to do so. In other words, our sattvasana, our inclination just to know and to be what we actually are. And we weaken our inclination to attend to other things. The weaker our inclination to attend to other things, that is what is called vairagya. And the strength of our inclination to attend to ourselves is what is called bhakti. So, though Bhagavan doesn't explicitly mention bhakti here, bhakti is clearly implied here. That is, we can have vairagya only to the extent that we have bhakti. In other words, only to the extent to which we have love to turn within, can we be free of the inclination to go outwards. So both are implied here. And as Bhagavan often said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. That is, without all-consuming love to know and to be what we actually are, we cannot reach our goal of merging back into the source from which we rose. And that state in which we merge back into the source from which we rose, and without ever leaving it, that is the state of jnana. That's why Bhagavan said, bhakti is the mother of jnana. So in this sentence, Bhagavan has talked about going deep within. We go deep within to the extent to which we hold firmly onto self-attentiveness. But we can go deep within only when we are not allowing our attention on anything else. When we free our mind from all inclination to attend to other things, then only we can go deep within. But it seems to most of us, during the course of our day-to-day life, there seem to be so many things that demand our attention. According to Bhagavan, actually, the whole life is going on according to destiny. So we need not attend to anything other than ourselves. Even if we don't attend to anything other than ourselves, life will go on as it's meant to. But because of the strength of our viṣaya-vāsaṇās and our habit of attending to other things, we've got a strong sense of doership, and so it seems to us to be necessary. Or I've got my work to do, that my work involves so much attention to it, so I'm not able to attend to myself all the time. This is an objection that many people may raise. So Bhagavan in the next sentence gives us an assurance. That is, it is necessary for us to go deep within in order to retrieve that pearl, but in order to develop that vairagya that is required in order to sink deep within, it is sufficient for us just to cling to self-attentiveness as much as possible. That is what he's assuring us in the next sentence. He says, Oruvan tan sarupate edu-varaiyil. Oruvan means one in the sense of one person, referring to each one of us. Oruvan tan sarupate edu-varaiyil. Tan sarupate edu-varaiyil means until one attains swarupa, one's own real nature, Oravan Nirantara, that is, the Oravan is connected with the main clause. Nirantara Swarupa Smaranaye Patruvanayim. If one clings fast to uninterrupted Swarupa Smarana. Swarupa Smarana. Swarupa means, as I said, it means our own real nature, what we actually are. Smarana means remembrance. So Swarupa Smarana in effect means the same as Swarupa Dhyana, the term he used in the previous sentence to describe the practice of self-attentiveness. But though these are alternative descriptions of the same thing, his use of the term remembrance here, smarana, is significant. Why? Because we, for example, in the path of bhakti, it is often said one should try to remember God throughout the day. Whatever else one may be doing, one should try to keep the remembrance of God in one's mind. That is, we shouldn't forget about God. That is what is said in bhakti. And this is so even in, I mean, in all devotional paths, not only in Hinduism, in all religions, they emphasize the importance of remembering God. I think in Sufism, I've forgotten what the term is. There's some term they use, which means remembrance. So you should always be trying to remember God. That is generally what is taught in all devotional. I mean, all devotional practices are centered around keeping the mind dwelling upon God. That means remembrance of God. So here Bhagavan is talking about Swarupa Smarana, because what is God? God is nothing but our own real nature. So remembering our own real nature, remembering ourselves, in other words, being self-attentive, or at least self-attentive to a certain extent throughout the day. That is what is implied here. And he says nirantara. And nirantara means without end or without interruption, uninterruptedly, ceaselessly holding on to that Swarupa Smarana. If one does so, adu-varaiyil, that alone is sufficient. So what Bhagavan implies in this sentence is, that the whole sentence is, if one clings fast to uninterrupted self-remembrance until one attains one's real nature, that alone is sufficient. What he means here is, even when we're not able to go deep within ourselves, throughout the day, we should be trying to hold on to at least a tenuous current of self-attentiveness. We shouldn't be forgetting to attend to ourselves. Whatever else we may be doing, whatever else we may be attending to, who is attending to this? I am. So we should be trying to hold on to that remembrance of that I, whatever else we may be doing. In other words, we need to hold on to at least a tenuous current, or one sometimes describes it as a tenuous current of self-attentiveness. We need to hold on to that even in the midst of our other activities. So in practice for most of us, two things are going on in the course of our practice. That is, in the midst of other activities, we try to hold on to this self-remembrance, at least a certain degree of self-attentiveness we try to hold on to throughout the day, whatever else we may be doing. And at times when we are free from other preoccupations, we try to go deep within. So what he's describing in the previous sentence is the attempts to go deep within by trying to hold firmly just to self-attentiveness, for which we need strong vairagya. And even when we are not able to hold so firmly to self-attentiveness, even in the midst of other activities, at least a certain degree of self-attentiveness we should be trying to hold on to. The more we hold on to that, at least a certain degree of self-attentiveness in the midst of other activities, the more our vairagya will become strong, and the deeper we'll be able to go within when we are free of other activities. So these two, the
they're not two different practices. Both of them are self-attentiveness, but one of them is holding on to at least a partial self-attentiveness, and the other is trying to be exclusively self-attentive. These two practices are complementary. The deeper we are able to go within, the easier it will be to hold on to that Swarupa Smarana throughout the day. And the more we hold on to Swarupa Smarana throughout the day, the deeper we will be able to go within. So these two practices are complementary. And indeed, supposing we have such a life, but throughout the day, from the time we wake up in the morning to the time we go to bed at night, we are so busy with so many other preoccupations, we may not even have time to sit for a few moments to attend to ourselves. But if in the midst of all our other activities, we try to hold on to that Swarupa Smarana, that self-remembrance or self-attentiveness, at least to a certain extent throughout the day, that alone is sufficient, Bhagavan says, because by holding on to that self-attentiveness, we are weakening the viṣaya-vāsaṇās, and thereby we are strengthening our vairagya, our bhakti and vairagya, and thereby eventually the time will come where our bhakti and vairagya is so strong, we'll be able to turn and go deep within and merge back into the source from which we rose. So what Bhagavan implies in these two sentences, firstly, as much as possible, we should try to go deep in this practice of self-attentiveness. And even when we're not able to go deep in this practice of self-attentiveness, we should be trying to hold on to self-attentiveness, at least to some extent. So Bhagavan is so much emphasizing here the need for this practice. Why does he emphasize it so much? Because it's only by this practice of trying to be self-attentive as much as possible, that means as intensely as possible, and also for as much duration as possible. This is the most effective way to weaken our viṣaya-vāsaṇās. And it's only by weakening our viṣaya-vāsaṇās that we can progress in this path and thereby eventually merge back into the source from which we came. We could turn within and merge back into the source from which we rose, even now, if we had sufficient love to do so. We don't have sufficient love because of the strength of our viṣaya-vāsaṇās, our liking to go outwards. So we need to persevere in this practice until our viṣaya-vāsaṇās are weakened and our sat-vāsaṇā is strengthened to a sufficient degree. Then we will turn within and be swallowed in the light of pure self-awareness, after which there will be no rising again, because then it will be clearly known, I am always that and nothing other than that. I am always I, nothing other than I. So there never was any such thing as ego, so there's no question of me ever rising again, because I never rose in the first place. That is the ultimate clarity that we will get. But until we achieve that clarity, we need to cling to self-attentiveness as much as possible, both as deeply as possible and for as much time as possible. We need to hold on to it at least tenuously, as much as possible throughout the day. And when we have moments of, or when we are free of other activities, we should try to go deeper within. That is the implication of those two sentences. And then in the final two sentences of this paragraph, Bhagavan gives a very nice analogy. That is all he says in these final two sentences. He just gives an analogy. What it is analogous to, he doesn't say. But we can understand from the context in which he said this, we can interpret this analogy. First, I will just give the analogy as Bhagavan says it. Kotte kul edu-varaiyil uṭpatti-sthāṇattilēyē. So long as enemies are within the fortress, adilirundu veliye vandu konde irukkiṉḍṟaṉavō. They will be continuously coming out from it. That's the first sentence. And in the second sentence, he says, vara vara avaigaḻai-y-ellām vetti konde irundal. If one is continuously cutting them down, as and when they come, kotte kaivasa padam. The fortress will eventually be captured.
kai means hand, vasa means under control of it. In other words, it's an idiomatic way of saying it will be captured. So all Bhagavan has said here, so long as there are enemies within the fortress, they'll be continuously coming out from it. If one is continuously cutting down all of them as and when they come, the fortress will eventually be captured. So what does he mean by this? Obviously, Bhagavan isn't talking here about military strategy or anything like that. Bhagavan is using this as an analogy. So to what is it analogous? The enemies within the fortress are our viṣaya-vāsaṇās. The fortress is our own heart. That is, ego and its army of viṣaya-vāsaṇās have captured the fortress of our heart. So if we besiege that fortress, they will be continuously coming out from it. Whether that is, the vasanas will continuously coming out from it, whether we besiege it or not. But when we are trying to be self-attentive, we are besieging that fortress. And why are they why do they need to come out of the fortress? Because so long as they remain in the fortress, they have no food or water there. So in order to survive, they need to come out to forage for food and water. So the vasanas rise. So long as there are vasanas in our heart, they will be continuously rising. Why are they rising? Because they need food and water. What is the food and water that they're seeking? When a vasana rises, it tends to, we feel that is, the vasana is our inclination to attend to something other than ourselves, to a viṣaya. So when we allow ourselves to be swayed by any viṣaya-vāsaṇa, we are thereby attending to something other than ourselves, and thereby we are nourishing that viṣaya-vāsaṇa. That is, viṣaya-vāsaṇas are nourished to the extent to which we allow ourselves to be swayed by them. If we don't allow ourselves to be swayed by them, they are thereby weakened. Because when we are swayed by them, we then attend to the viṣaya that if it's an inclination to attend to a viṣaya, whatever that viṣaya may be, if we attend to that viṣaya, we are thereby strengthening the inclination to attend to it. We are nourishing and sustaining that inclination. If we don't attend to that viṣaya, we are thereby weakening that viṣaya-vāsaṇa. So the vasanas are always coming out in order to get nourishment, the nourishment of our attention. Not our attention to the inclination itself, but to that to which what we are inclined to attend to. If we attend to that, we are thereby strengthening the inclination. So that is why Bhagavan says that so long as their enemies are within the fortress, they will be continuously coming out from it. So long as there's even the slightest trace of ego in our heart, that ego will have viṣaya-vāsaṇās, and those viṣaya-vāsaṇās will be coming out in the form of thoughts or phenomena, things to distract our attention away from ourselves. And then in the next sentence, he says, if one is continuously cutting down all of them as and when they come. So how do we cut down these vasanas as and when they come? That is what he said in the second sentence of this paragraph. As and when thoughts appear, then and there it is necessary to annihilate them by vichara in the very place from which they arise. So what Bhagavan says in the final sentence is referring to this. The place from which they arise is our heart, from ourself, in other words. And that is the fortress that Bhagavan refers to in this. So as soon as they come out of a fortress, if we cling to self-attentiveness, we are thereby cutting them down as and when they come. If we allow our attention to be diverted away to any viṣaya, whatever viṣaya we feel inclined to attend to, we are thereby strengthening that inclination. So we need to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly that we cut them down as and when they come. If we do so, the fortress will eventually be captured. That is, ego is sitting there in the fortress, sending out its army to forage for food. If we are cutting down the army as and when it comes, the army will eventually become so weak that we can enter the fortress of our heart, and thereby annihilate this ego. And when ego is annihilated, ego is the commander-in-chief of that army of viṣaya-vāsaṇās. Who is the commander-in-chief? Ego, because they're all egos, viṣaya-vāsaṇās. So when we annihilate ego, we thereby disperse, the army is thereby dispersed. It ceases, that is, no soldiers are going to continue fighting when they find their commander-in-chief has been annihilated. There's nothing left for them to fight for. They will disperse. Likewise, viṣaya-vāsaṇās cannot survive when ego is destroyed, because they're only egos, viṣaya-vāsaṇās. So this is a very nice analogy that Bhagavan gives us in this, in these last two sentences, and it indirectly what he's implying here is that, as I say, that ego is the commander-in-chief, and its army is its viṣaya-vāsaṇās. And so long as we continue feeding those viṣaya-vāsaṇās by allowing our attention, by allowing ourselves to be swayed by them, in other words, allowing our attention to go away from ourselves towards any viṣayas, we are thereby sustaining the enemy. And it takes longer for us to conquer them. So it's only by clinging firmly to self-attentiveness that we can thereby deprive the viṣaya-vāsaṇās of their food. They become weaker, and eventually they're so weak that we can enter the fortress and kill their commander-in-chief, namely ego. How do we kill ego? By turning that, when we turn our attention, when we have weakened the viṣaya-vāsaṇās to a sufficient extent, we will then be able to turn our attention 180 degrees away from all viṣayas back towards ourselves. When we attend to ourselves so keenly that we thereby cease to be aware of anything other than ourselves, we will then be aware of ourselves as pure awareness. Pure awareness is what we actually are. When ego experiences itself as pure awareness, it thereby ceases to be ego, because ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. When ego is aware of itself as just I am, it thereby ceases to be ego. So in this path, what we are trying to do, we as ego are trying to experience ourselves as we actually are, that is, as pure awareness. The moment we experience ourselves as pure awareness, we thereby cease to be ego. So it's necessary for ego to experience itself as pure awareness, but as soon as ego experiences itself as pure awareness, it's no longer ego, it is only pure awareness, because nothing other than pure awareness can experience pure awareness, because pure awareness is not an object. It's not even the subject. It is the ground. It is the reality of the subject, and therefore the ground from which both subject and object appear, and from which, on which, in which, and back into which they, from which, in which, and on which they appear, and into which they must again disappear. So it's only by clinging to self-attentiveness so firmly that eventually we're able to turn the full 180 degrees, and that we will thereby annihilate ego. And when we annihilate ego, automatically all its vasanas are annihilated along with it. During our practice, most of us are not turning, we need to turn 180 degrees just for one moment. So none of us have yet turned that full 180 degrees. During our practice, if we are just in the midst of other activities, if we're clinging to Swarupa Smarana, we may be turning just 10 or 20 or 30 degrees. If we're trying to go deeper within, we may be turning 90, 120, 150, even up to 179 degrees. But ego is not annihilated until we turn the full 180 degrees. But even when we turn 179 degrees, there's still a lingering awareness of viṣayas, of things other than ourselves. So long as there's even the slightest awareness of anything other than ourselves, who is aware of other things? Only ego. So ego survives until we turn the full 180 degrees. When we turn the full 180 degrees for one moment, ego will cease to exist. And in fact, what the clarity that will then shine forth is awe. I am only I. I have never been anything other than I. So there never was any ego at all. That is why the final experience is ajata. Bhagavan said, though he taught Drishti Shrishti Vada, he taught that everything appears only in the view of ego. The ultimate truth is, what his actual experience is there's no such thing as ego and therefore nothing else at all. What is alone is as it is, and it never undergoes any change, and nothing ever appears, because things can appear only in the view of something. In the view of what does everything appear? Only in the view of ourself as ego. When we investigate ourselves, we will find we were never ego, we were only that. So there never was any appearance at all. There is only that. That is, so the ultimate truth is ajata. That's what Bhagavan taught us. But we will experience that only when we turn the full 180 degrees. Until then, we just have to persevere in this practice. It doesn't matter how difficult it seems to be, or how much we seem to fail in our, how weak and feeble our efforts may be. It doesn't matter. No matter how weak and feeble they may be, at least let us make that effort. Because as Bhagavan said, every little effort we make in this path, every of attending to ourselves, we are thereby we are thereby taking one step closer to our goal, because every attempt we make to attend to ourselves, we are thereby strengthening the sattvasana and weakening the viṣaya-vāsaṇās. So if we persevere in this practice, if we cling, if we are tenacious in our clinging to this practice, as he said in the previous paragraph, if we completely reject the thought that we are a sinner, but we are so unqualified, and if we are zealous in this practice of self-attentiveness, and we are steadfast in this practice, we will certainly be reformed. So Bhagavan has given us a great assurance. So all we need to do is to persevere in this practice. Doesn't matter how strong our viṣaya-vāsaṇās may be, by persevering in this practice, we can gradually weaken them. And eventually, that is cutting down the enemy as and when they come out, and eventually the fortress will be captured. So Bhagavan ends both these paragraphs, this 10th and 11th paragraph, both of them ends with a very great assurance. But as he says in the next paragraph, in the 12th paragraph, the 12th paragraph is, I'll just give a preview of what we'll talk about next time. The 12th paragraph is very short and sweet. Bhagavan gives us an assurance in the 12th paragraph. God and Guru are in truth not different. Just as what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger will not return, so those who have been caught in the look of Guru's grace will never be forsaken, but will surely be saved by him. What does he mean by caught in the look of Guru's grace? The very fact that we've been attracted to his teachings, attracted to trying to follow his path, means we have been caught in the look of his grace. Somehow he has entered our heart and attracted us to him. However, we may be the worst of worst sinners. We may have viṣaya-vāsaṇās may be so strong, but we've been caught in the look of his grace. So he gives us an assurance we will never be forsaken and we will surely be saved by him. However, he gives an important, he ends that 12th paragraph with a very important caveat. Eṉṇum guru kartya varipadi tavaradu nadika vēṇḍum. Nevertheless, it is necessary to walk unfailingly in the path shown by Guru, in accordance with the path shown by Guru. So the path that Bhagavan has shown us is this simple path of self-investigation and self-surrender. However unqualified we may feel ourselves to be, if we try our best to follow this path, if we walk unfailingly in accordance with this path, trying our best to turn our attention within, we will certainly be saved by him. So in these 3 paragraphs, he gives us so much assurance, but he emphasizes that it's necessary for us to do our part. That is, he will do everything, but we have to follow his path unfailingly. Why is that? Because being saved by Bhagavan means being swallowed by him. He uses very appropriately there, he uses the analogy of what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger. So we've been caught in the jaws of a tiger. The tiger is Bhagavan. And we cannot escape his jaws, but we need to follow the path he has shown us. So being saved by him means being swallowed by him. So we must be willing to yield ourselves to him. We must be willing to be swallowed by him, to be swallowed by that infinite light of pure awareness, which is Bhagavan. He will never swallow us until we are willing to be swallowed. That is, we have to give ourselves to him. We have to surrender ourselves to him. And how do we surrender ourselves? By clinging firmly to self-attentiveness, as he implies in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph. So all these are so beautifully connected, the ideas going one on from the other, and he brings in bhakti and bhakti and jnana, the path of jnana and the path of bhakti is blending them together as one. We must have so much love to follow this path that he's shown us, and we must try our best. That is giving him the consent he requires in order to swallow us. That is, until we surrender ourselves, he's not going to kill us until we are willing to be killed. So in order to cultivate that willingness to be killed, that willingness to surrender ourselves completely, we need to cling to self-attentiveness. The more we cling to self-attentiveness, the more our viṣaya-vāsaṇās are weakened and our sat-vasana is strengthened. That sat-vasana is that is the inclination just to be as we are. That is, in other words, that is the love to surrender ourselves to him. That is all he requires. He's ready to swallow us at any moment. But we must surrender ourselves completely, and we can surrender ourselves only by clinging so firmly to self-attentiveness that we don't give even the slightest room to the rising of any other thought. As he says in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph, that is giving ourselves to God, he says. So that is surrender, and that is vichara. Vichara, that is self-investigation and self-surrender. Though Bhagavan sometimes presented them as two paths, they're actually one and the same path. And this is the path that he's shown us, and this is the path that we need to follow unfailingly. We need to walk unfailingly in accordance with this path by trying our best to be self-attentive as much as we can be. That's all Bhagavan asks of us. Everything else he will take care of. That's why he says, if we cling firmly to self-attentiveness, that is sufficient. Everything else he will take care of. So we have to do our little part by trying as much as possible to be self-attentive. That is what Bhagavan is emphasizing so much in this work, Nāṉ Ār, particularly in these paragraphs 10, 11, 12, and 13. So that's all we need to do.